Take yourself on a mental journey to the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean in the early 19th century. There we'll meet a creature that would launch a nearly 30-year conflict against humanity, directly inspire one of the greatest novels ever written, and give whales soul in the human mind. But for the crew of a whaling ship, this was a world of immense loneliness and ever-present danger, a place where voyages could stretch for years. The line between survival and oblivion was perilously thin at times. The closest humans not on your ship were hundreds to thousands of miles away. In this isolated world, stories were currency, cautionary tales, as a way to map the psychological terrain of their brutal profession. Sailors rounding the treacherous Cape Horn would exchange news and legends, but over time, one name began to surface more than any other. It wasn't the name of a captain or a ship, but of a whale. They called him Mocha Dick, the seaman slayer of the South Pacific. He was more than just an animal. He was a personality, a known adversary whose exploits were chronicled across the fleets. In an industry built on the anonymous slaughter of an intelligent creature viewed as a natural resource, the simple act of giving this one whale a name was a profound admission. It acknowledged that this creature was different, an individual force to be reckoned with. Mocha Dick was an old bull sperm whale of staggering proportions, a true leviathan. When he was finally slain and measured, his body stretched over 70 feet from head to tail, making him among the largest individual toothed whales to ever be documented. But it was his coloring, rather than his immense length and girth, that first seared him into the memories of sailors. He was described as being as white as wool, a spectral figure against the deep blue of the ocean. From a distance, a lookout might mistake him for a white cloud drifting on the horizon, or a snowdrift breaking the waves. This ghostly appearance, likely a result of albinism or simply extreme age, made him instantly recognizable. His uniqueness didn't end there. Unlike most sperm whales whose skin is relatively smooth, Mocha Dick's giant battering ram of a head was rugged and heavily encrusted with a thick layer of barnacles. This gave him a gnarled, fearsome appearance, as if he wore a kind of natural god-tier armor forged over decades of battle. Even the way he breathed was distinct. A typical sperm whale spouts at an angle, with a short, puffing noise. Mocha Dick, however, was said to spray water in a powerful, continuous, and vertical column, a blast accompanied by a steady roar that sounded to sailors like a freight train. And in an effort to make sure my video isn't demonetized, I'm going to refrain from making the obvious joke here. I'll let you guys fill that hole in the comments. These features, his color, his armored head, his thundering spout, created an unmistakable profile. When whalers saw him, they knew exactly who they were facing. Yet, for all his intimidating features, Mocha Dick possessed a remarkably complex temperament. Accounts from multiple sources agree on a crucial point. When sailors treated him with respect, he was surprisingly docile. He was known to swim peacefully alongside ships, a gentle giant moving with lazy grace among the very boats designed for his destruction. This peaceful nature, however, was a thin veil, and if seamen would try to blast him with a harpoon, this soft, gentle giant would harden with astonishing rapidity. Mocha Dick's career as the Pacific's most formidable defender wasn't a brief affair. His legend was built over a span of nearly 30 years. The first documented encounters and attacks occurred sometime before 1810, and he would continue to haunt the whaling grounds off the coast of Chile until his brutal end. Over these decades, he amassed a combat record that became the stuff of legend around tavern tables in Nantucket and across the whaling world. The numbers, while likely embellished through the natural process of sailors telling and retelling tall tales, speak to the scale of his reputation. Some accounts claim he was involved in over 100 separate skirmishes with whaling crews. He was credited with the destruction of at least 20 whaleboats, which are the smaller oar-powered crafts launched from the main ship. According to his legend, he ate up a truly remarkable amount of seamen in these encounters, with some figures citing as many as 30 sailors gobbled up. This figure is disputed by some modern historians as impossibly high given the records of the time. What is true, however, is that he was the veteran of countless battles over the decades, and until his last, he always won. His fame grew to the point that he became a fixture in the daily lives of whalers, and when ships would cross paths on sea routes, they would ask about any sightings. While most avoided the creature, for some ambitious whaling captains, an encounter with Mocha Dick was the ultimate test of skill and courage. These captains would intentionally sail their vessels near his home territory off Mocha Island, hoping for a chance to challenge the King of the Pacific. Over his course of combat with his challengers, he learned various techniques to get the best of the whalers. For instance, he would maneuver in a way so as to present his broad, powerful back to harpooners, ensuring his weaker parts weren't penetrated. The physical evidence of his one-whale crusade against these men was etched into his very body. He was said to trail 50 to 100 yards of multiple old harpoon line from his back, the tattered remnants of past victories. Now let me just get into the whaling industry and whales themselves here for a moment. The 19th century whaling industry wasn't a small-scale operation. It was a global economic engine, and essentially the energy sector of its day. Before the discovery of petroleum in 1859, the modern world ran on whale oil. It was the fuel that lit the lamps of burgeoning cities from London to New York, and the lubricant that greased the gears and machinery of the Industrial Revolution. At its peak in the mid-1840s, the American whaling fleet alone numbered over 700 vessels, making the industry a cornerstone of the young nation's economy. Whaling voyages were monumental undertakings. A ship might be at sea for up to 4 years at a time, pushing into the most remote and uncharted corners of the globe in pursuit of its quarry. This immense globe-spanning network is what allowed the story of a single whale off the coast of South America to become a pervasive legend in New England. Ultimately, though, it was a dirty and inhumane business that ended up decimating the populations of some of the world's most majestic creatures. Sperm whales possess the largest brain of any animal, and they're highly intelligent, sociable animals that many scientists believe are completely self-aware. These animals have extremely strong family bonds and are believed to be able to actively think, much like a human. In this context, the story of Mocha Dick is likely more of a story of revenge than the whalers of the time realized. It's entirely possible that this great beast's family was slain, and he came to a conscious decision to crusade against whalers in particular. As evidence for this, Mocha Dick would come up next to vessels and swim along peacefully until he was attacked, at which point he would become a force of nature. While we can't know for sure, personally, I feel like as we have a greater understanding of whale intelligence, we may have a pretty firm answer on this one day. That said, I think his final encounter will prove that this whale was acting out of some sort of higher calling. After decades of victorious encounters, the life of Mocha Dick came to a dramatic and tragic end in 1838. The story of his final battle was immortalized in an 1839 article by the American writer and explorer Jeremiah Reynolds. According to Reynolds' account, the conflict didn't begin with an attack on Mocha Dick himself. Instead, the whalers had targeted a female sperm whale and had just succeeded in slaying her calf. As the mother whale grieved over her whale child, Mocha Dick appeared. In what was described as an act of selfless intervention, the old warrior charged into the fray, not to save himself, but to defend the distraught mother. This single detail reframed the entire narrative for the 19th century audience. His final act wasn't one of instinctive aggression, but of apparent compassion and altruism. He attacked the whaleboats with his customary fury, but this time his heroism was his undoing. The battle was fierce. Reynolds's narrative paints a vivid picture of the chaos. The massive white whale charging, the small boat being tossed on the waves, the hiss of the harpoon finding its mark, and the line smoking as Mocha was about to take them to the abyss. This time, however, there would be no escape, and Mocha Dick's power faded. Mortally wounded, the great whale entered his death throes. He thrashed his enormous flukes, turning the sea into what Reynolds described as a, quote, whirlpool of bloody foam. Then, with one final convulsive effort to twist free, he turned slowly onto his side and lay still, a dead mass upon the ocean he had ruled for so long. When the whalers brought the massive carcass alongside their ship, the scale of their victory became clear. At over 70 feet, he was one of the largest whales they had ever seen, and he yielded an astonishing 100 barrels of oil, double the amount of a usual bull. And as they stripped this whale emperor of his blubber, they found the final silent testament to his life of struggle. There were 19 rusted harpoon heads that he had carried with him for years, the scars of his crusade against the whaling industry. While no one knew it at the time, Mocha Dick's passing was the beginning of his immortality. In May 1839, Jeremiah Reynolds published his dramatic account of the whale's life in a popular New York publication, the Knickerbocker Magazine. Among the readers of that magazine was a young man named Herman Melville. Reynolds's article planted a seed in Melville's imagination, providing him with the core concept for the antagonist of what would become his masterpiece. It's a crucial point of history that Melville's novel, Moby Dick, wasn't inspired by a single event, but was a masterful synthesis of two separate true stories. The first was the tale of Mocha Dick. From Reynolds's article, Melville took the character of his great white whale. However, for all his ferocity, there were no credible accounts of Mocha Dick ever sinking a large, three-masted whaling ship, only the smaller whaling boats. For that plot point, Melville turned to a different, equally true, and even more horrifying event: the 1820 sinking of the whale ship Essex. The Essex, out of Nantucket, was rammed and sunk in the middle of the Pacific by an enormous enraged whale, leaving its surviving crew to turn one member into an item on the menu. The world that created Mocha Dick is gone, and in perhaps one of the most bizarre twists of history, this whale won his final victory against humanity. Though Moby Dick wasn't born from an activist's pen, it became one of the most powerful literary sparks for modern anti-whaling sentiment. When Herman Melville released his novel in 1851, he was dissecting humanity's arrogance toward nature. Captain Ahab's relentless hunt for the white whale was an allegory for mankind's doomed crusade to dominate the natural world. For the first time, readers were forced to see the whale not as oil and bone, but as an intelligent, mysterious being, a thinking adversary rather than a resource. In a century that glorified whaling as industry and adventure, Moby Dick quietly planted the seed of moral doubt. Its visceral depictions of the realities of the trade made whaling feel less heroic and more horrific. Ishmael's awe toward the whale's majesty contrasted with Ahab's madness, suggesting that reverence, not conquest, was the truer path. This inversion of values anticipated the ecological awakening that would come a century later. So while Melville certainly didn't attend any whale conservation meetings, his novel did something greater. It gave whales souls in the human imagination. Without that transformation, campaigns to, quote, save the whales might never have resonated as deeply. Moby Dick turned a beast into a symbol, and a symbol into a movement. Without Mocha Dick's unrelenting conflict against whalers, Moby Dick would have never been written, and our world would be completely different today. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy, just taking a second to remind you to hit the notification bell and turn on all notifications for my channel. Also, don't forget that you can support my work for as little as $1 a month through the YouTube membership. In the middle of the 6th century, the city of Constantinople was the center of the known world. It was the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, a sprawling metropolis of marble, gold, and silk, all ruled by one of the most ambitious men in history, Emperor Justinian I. From his great palace, Justinian was reshaping civilization. He was codifying 1,000 years of Roman law, raising the magnificent dome of the Hagia Sophia, and sending his armies to reclaim lost territories in Africa and Italy. His was an empire of order, faith, and absolute authority. Yet for over 50 years, in the very waters that served as the city's lifeline, a power existed that obeyed no emperor. It was a creature of immense size and unpredictable fury, a living monster that literally ate Roman seamen for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The Byzantines gave it a name: Porphyrios. This is the story of the whale that terrorized the world's greatest city and became a personal obsession for the emperor who couldn't defeat it. Our knowledge of this incredible saga comes from a single indispensable source, the historian Procopius of Caesarea, a high-ranking official who chronicled Justinian's reign. Procopius describes a beast that menaced the waters around Constantinople for more than half a century. Porphyrios wasn't a constant threat. The animal would sometimes vanish for long periods, allowing a tense calm to settle over the waterways. But its returns were always sudden and violent, reinforcing its terrifying, almost supernatural reputation. The whale's attacks were indiscriminate and devastating. It made no distinction between a humble fishing boat and a merchant vessel laden with precious grain from Egypt. It even rammed and sank dromons, the sleek, powerful galleys of the Roman navy. The attacks were most common in the Bosphorus Strait, the narrow channel that separates Europe from Asia and serves as the gateway to the capital. The psychological impact was immense. The mere reputation of Porphyrios was enough to cause panic. Captains would often take long, costly, and time-consuming detours to avoid the areas the whale was known to frequent, disrupting the vital flow of commerce. For Emperor Justinian, Porphyrios was understood as something beyond a mere economic or maritime hazard. It was a profound and public challenge to his authority. Justinian's entire reign was built on the concept of the restoration of the Roman Empire's former glory. He saw himself as God's chosen ruler, a figure of absolute power tasked with imposing order on a chaotic world. His administration sought to control everything from silk production to religious doctrine, and his armies were re-establishing Roman dominion across the Mediterranean. Yet, this whale represented a force of pure chaos operating with impunity in his own backyard. The security of Constantinople's sea lanes was not a trivial matter. The city was the hub of a vast trade network that connected Europe and Asia, and its very survival depended on the steady flow of ships through the Bosphorus. This maritime commerce was a cornerstone of the imperial economy, heavily regulated and taxed by the state. Porphyrios was a direct threat to this critical infrastructure. Procopius states plainly that Justinian made it a matter of great concern to eliminate the creature. Despite making it a matter of imperial concern, Justinian's best minds couldn't devise any effective way to hunt or trap the beast. This failure was a stark and embarrassing symbol of the limits of human power. Porphyrios was a living, breathing refutation of the imperial image of omnipotence, an untamable sovereign of the sea that answered to no law but its own. For millennia, historians and later scientists have debated the true identity of this legendary creature. Procopius, writing in an age when whales were poorly understood and often viewed simply as sea monsters, provides just enough detail to fuel two competing theories. The first possibility is that Porphyrios was a sperm whale. The reported size fits, as does the lengthy lifespan, which could easily span the 50-year period of its activity. Sperm whales are also known for their aggressive temperament and have been documented ramming ships, a behavior that aligns perfectly with the accounts. Herman Melville, in his research for Moby Dick, came across the story and concluded that Porphyrios was likely a sperm whale. Given the extreme influence of Melville, this understanding has had a profound impact on how people view this creature. However, this theory has problems. These whales are exceedingly rare in the eastern Mediterranean. Further, Procopius mentions that the whale was hunting dolphins when it met its end, a behavior not typical for the deep-diving, squid-eating whale. This leads to the second major theory. Porphyrios was an unusually large orca. This identification is supported by the whale's location and its reported diet. Orcas are found in the Mediterranean and are famous for hunting dolphins. One hypothesis suggests that a young orca may have become trapped in the Sea of Marmara, where an abundance of prey allowed it to grow to a monstrous size. The main argument against this is Procopius's measurements, which describe a creature far larger than any known orca. The maximum size for an orca in the wild is about 32 feet, which isn't incredibly far off the 45 feet associated with Porphyrios. It's possible, of course, that terrified eyewitnesses exaggerated its size, a common phenomenon when facing a traumatic event. Just as mysterious as its species is its name. The origin of Porphyrios is uncertain, but the theories reveal how the Byzantines tried to comprehend the beast. It may have come from the Greek word porphyra, meaning a deep, wine-dark purple, perhaps a description of the animal's skin color. Under this theory, some have translated his name as Purple Boy, basically a sign of affection for the sea-bound monster. Another theory connects it to Porphyrion, a mythological giant who dared to wage war against the gods, framing the whale as a primordial, god-defying force. A third possibility is that it was named after a famous and beloved charioteer of the era. Perhaps most compellingly, the name could evoke the imperial purple, the color strictly reserved for the emperor. In this light, the name is a sign of grudging respect, an acknowledgement that this creature possessed a majesty and power that made it a rival emperor of the sea. After 50 years of terror, the end for Porphyrios came not from an imperial ship, but from its own primal instincts. One day, while chasing a pod of dolphins near the mouth of the Black Sea, the great creature pursued its prey too far into the shallows and ran aground in thick coastal mud. It struggled mightily to free itself, but its immense weight only caused it to sink deeper, sealing its fate. Word spread like wildfire through the nearby communities. The monster that had plagued their parents and grandparents was helpless on the shore. A mob quickly formed, armed with axes, ropes, and a thirst for revenge. Their initial attacks were futile, and Procopius states that their axe blows on its thick flesh had little effect. But the people were relentless. They returned with heavy ropes and wagons, dragging the behemoth further inland, away from any chance of escape. There they set upon it again, finally managing to hack the great creature into pieces. The relief was immense and immediate. Procopius tells us that some of the locals ate the meat right there on the beach, while others took their portions home to be cured. It was a final, visceral act of dominion over the beast that had held them in fear for so long. Yet, even in victory, a sliver of fear remained. A rumor began to circulate that the whale they had slain was not the true Porphyrios, but some other unfortunate creature. Ultimately, we don't know whether this was truly the beast, or whether this was just some unfortunate whale that took the brunt of the fury on behalf of Porphyrios. Anyway, let me know if you enjoyed these whale tales in the comments, because if you did, I've got two more stories I want to drop.